is that just, is there a particular?
Yeah, you just press the next
Oh
slide.
yeah, right, brilliant.
Right, I'm
No
going to
problem.
introduce ourselves then, and I'll check it on the phone to make sure it's live. So good evening, everyone. You should be able to hear and see myself and Leah. We're just going to check that it's working on the Facebook groups, because that's obviously what it's all about. Hope everyone's having a good day. You'll probably be watching this either live or on the recording, which is amazing. If you are on the recording, please do me a favor and pop recording or rewatch in the actual comment section if you've got any comments to make on this evening's webinar. We'd love to hear from you. Those of you that have come on specifically to listen to Leah, you've got an amazing presentation that she's going to give you this evening, telling you all about the sort of things that you need to do if you are building a business that you might sell. And the reason why I frame it that way is because I've always been taught that we should build a business to sell, even if we decide not to. And if we do that, we build better businesses. So I'm really hoping you'll get loads and loads of value from this evening's webinar, and loads of ideas for you and your businesses. So watching this doesn't mean to say you're about to sell your business, but it means that you'll be better equipped if one day you do decide to sell, because you've had this content and you've had this information. So I'm going to shut up and let you listen to Leah explain to you the sort of things you should be doing if it's 5 years or 5 months, and put your comments in the chat, and we can ask Leah to help you with any of your questions, or as I say, put recording in the chat so that we know that you're on replay, or put replay in the chat, and we can obviously direct the questions and responses to you as well. So please take part, it's your session. Hopefully you'll get lots and lots of value. So welcome, Leah.
Hello, thank you for having me. So yes, so I am Leah Turner. I'm the co-founder of Owen Froebel Limited. So we are a specialist nursery brokers. We've been going since August 2022. And prior to this, I've been in mergers and acquisitions as a broker for about 13 years. So, you know, there's been no shortage of problems within sales that I've not had to see and deal with along the way. So as a broker, one of the most common things I always hear is people say to me, but I don't want to sell now. And that always makes me laugh, because firstly, I think, you know, we have a bit of a reputation as brokers that we might just pin you down and force you to sell your business before you're ready to do so. And that's obviously I'm not actually allowed to do that, despite what some people think. However, as Imogen sort of said, it's all about having one eye on exit. And it's about kind of planning about what that exit is going to look like for you. And that's something I'm really quite passionate about, is making sure that people kind of have thought about this before they go into it. You get people who might say, well, actually, I've already decided that when my business gets to this size, that is when I'm going to sell, when I can achieve this figure. Or it might be that people say, well, this is the big birthday I'm aiming for, so I want to be out by then. It might just be something a bit more vague, like, actually, well, one day I'd quite like to go on holiday and not get phone calls about staffing issues. You know, that's kind of on the ball at some point. A vague plan is still a plan. And that's the key thing. And you should always kind of have one eye on it. And there's kind of 3 core questions you should be asking yourself. So it's like, well, when do we think this might happen? Okay, it doesn't have to be a definitive date, but what circumstances might be the circumstances that make go, now's the day to do it. If that happens, who would you like to take over the setting? So actually, do you have a dream buyer in mind? Is it that actually you've got your one eye on your manager thinking, I want them to have this when I decide it's time to go? And also, what would you like to do after the sale? A lot of people, they don't sell to retire. They sell because actually they've done that bit. They don't want to be doing the day-to-day anymore. And actually what they'd like to do is carry on within the sector for another 10 or 15 years. So would you be staying within the setting after you go? Or are you looking to go off and do something else? And then, of course, the big question is, well, how do I get what I want from the setting when that time comes? I think one of the biggest things I find working doing the job I do is that, unfortunately, I often come into the lives of people when actually this decision has been made for them through circumstance. It's often a case of, actually, I have to sell tomorrow. And unfortunately, that is too late to be then asking these questions, because that decision's been made. You just have to get through it. So part of planning, not even necessarily putting a date on it, but part of planning is saying, well, if this decision is made for me tomorrow, am I in the best position to do so, to go forward with this? Thinking about selling your business, it's also about recognizing that it's not just about you. We work within a sector that's quite insular, but also, even if nothing changes within your business day to day, month to month, year to year, your numbers are very stable. There's changes in the market that are going to dictate the type of sale you have. And one thing I also recommend is that you should always kind of have one eye on what the market is doing and what is going to think about you. The nursery market is changing very, very rapidly at the moment. And there's various reasons about this. And part of it is about kind of looking forward and predicting the future and seeing how that is going to change over the next few years. Because if you're thinking 5 years exit, then actually the type of buyer who might look at your setting today might be a very different buyer in 5 years' time. The biggest change within the market at the moment is that actually it's what we classify as an unconsolidated market. So when we talk about markets, we talk a lot between ourselves about groups, and I think everyone has their own opinions about the groups and the Bright Horizons of Busy Bees, but a regular opinion is very much they're buying everything. Now, actually, that's not true. In reality, it's still very much an independent market. Lots of individuals who own single settings or a couple of settings, and that's still very much the norm within this sector. But actually what happens is that over time, markets become consolidated and groups do end up buying more. And as I say, as a sector, we're at the very early stages of that. What's interesting about that is it attracts a lot of new people into the business. So actually, traditionally, we've kind of got the groups at one end, and then we've got individual purchasers at the other end. And the middle hasn't been very particularly crowded. But what you've got now is you've got what's called micro consolidators. These are people who are coming into the market, looking at buying nurseries, because by comparison to a lot of sectors, they are still relatively cheap because the market is unconsolidated. They're often coming from very similar sectors. So it might actually be from something like healthcare, dentistry, pharmacy, care homes. But those are markets that actually have largely been consolidated. They're pretty much owned by groups now. As a result, values, multiples of EBITDA, have kind of reached where they're going to reach. They're not really going to increase much more. So people are now looking for other markets where they can buy a little bit cheaper, build themselves up a group, and then 5 or 10 years' time, flip on a bit further. Micro consolidators, though, will also include people who are already in the sector. So it might be actually people who have 2, 3, 4 settings already and are looking to grow further. And as I said, this is the big growth area. And it's a fun time to be in this sector because actually what these guys are doing is they're putting pressure, they're pressuring up and they're pressuring down to make sure that actually there's more buyers looking at all types of settings. Individual buyers particularly ties in with the next point, which is financing. And that's, again, something that's changing quite a lot. If you're in a smaller setting, so 20 places, for example, it may be that actually your buyer is more likely to be an individual, someone who's going to look to work within the business themselves rather than actually kind of growing their own group. Now, financing for individuals it's still not easy, but it's getting easier. And that's something to remember. And that will also continue to change as the market consolidates. So in reality, for most banks, childcare is actually within their healthcare sector. And so healthcare is classified as a green light spend. And what that means is essentially when the economy is doing very, very well, then what will happen is that they will push money towards those sectors because it's considered a good, safe area to be in. For childcare, though, it is still a little bit trickier. So whereas for some of the healthcare sectors, it's quite easy as an individual to get in and get finance, for individuals buying nurseries at the moment, you are still looking at having to have a 30% contribution. So if you're buying a £300,000 setting, you're looking at £100,000 in cash to put in, and also security as well. So it's not accessible for everybody. So where there's lots of individuals moving into the market at the moment, and it may be that you have a setting full of practitioners who are desperate to one day own their own setting, in reality, as it stands at the moment, not all of them are going to be able to do it, but that is going to get easier. One of the biggest changes in this market, and it's really kind of coming through, as I said, within that middle ground, is private equity funding. Now, this is something that people are always a bit wary of because it sounds, let's face it sounds very city, it sounds very slick. And actually, it can be, people can be a bit wary about it. It's all about the bottom line. But this is where the growth will really, really come from. And as a sector, we've really attracted a lot of interest to private equity funding at the moment, just purely because actually it's a growing sector. You know, changes in funding have spurred that on faster, but it was happening even before then. And as I say, there's always going to be a need for childcare. There's a desperate need to get the parents back to work, and this is only going to continue growing. And as a result, there's lots of these private equity firms who are looking to really, really push into this arena. Now, the interesting thing about this is that actually it can have a lot of knock-on effects. And as I say, people can be a little bit wary about private equity because it sounds like it is all about the bottom line. But what you find is when private equity enters the market, that actually everything changes. And it will change even for the smallest of settings. There's a drip down effect and it will have that impact, even if you're a setting that's never going to be of interest to a private equity firm. So the first thing about that is a capital infusion. So if you consider it that they're coming in with lots and lots of money, and so they can invest in acquisitions, of course, but they can also invest in startups. So you can see new styles of nurseries, new groups coming into play, and they can also invest on the expansion of existing groups. So we've all seen N Family expand rapidly over the last couple of years. That's all through private equity funding. That's where that's all come from. There's also quality and operational improvement. Now, again, people think of private equity as a bit soulless, but actually, in reality, lots of private equity firms, they actually kind of have a requirement within their funding to look towards places where they can show corporate social responsibility and are required to do a certain amount of investment in what you almost say community type investment. So, you know, they are looking to get into the sector because it shows they can kind of really make a difference. They're required as well to show that they are attempting to make improvements within the sector as well. So when these people are coming in, these improvements aren't just within their own little groups. It's about showing that they're actively involved within the regulation and, you know, the industry overall to see an overall improvement across the board. A lot of this also means that they bring in a lot of new people and people with transferable skills. And actually, again, you know, that's not a bad thing. When you've got people who have come from other businesses and other sectors, they bring new ideas, they bring fresh ideas. And you see things like training academies and things like that, encouraging new people into the business because actually it's a new approach to making sure we're resolving the recruitment issue. You also get innovation and technology. So this is, I mean, private equity at the end of the day, yes, you know, we talk about corporate social responsibility. They do want to make money, though. Of course they do. And actually what they look to do is run their businesses on economies of scale. So they're looking for efficient ways to run their businesses and make money. Is the key thing, and innovation and technology is key to this, you know. And over time what happens is that becomes accessible across the sector. So I mean, we only have to look at things like the nursery software, the amount of different types of nursery software you have out there now that requires you to do so much within your own setting, even if that's a small setting, engaging with parents, invoicing, everything. And all of those have come into effect because actually there's an increased innovation in technology. Things like funding circle, which is such a straightforward thing, but actually is so funding loop, I apologize. It's such a straightforward thing, but it saves you so much time and things like that. You're going to see more of dripping down into other settings. There's also increased progression. And I think a lot of people, when they look to sell, they kind of think, well, what am I going to do next? And as a sector, you know, we know for our staff that if they get to manager, the next step for them is either to get their own nursery, or that's kind of it, really, you know, especially if you're only setting. And so you kind of look at your manager with the view of at one point you're going to lose them. What these groups and this private equity allow us to do is actually to say, well, you know, there's going to be a much bigger business. They're going to bring head office functions and infrastructure into place that needs people who understand the business. A good example of this is actual dentistry, because dentistry as a sector is largely consolidated. And what you find is at the upper end, in a lot of the high ranking operational roles within dental head offices, the people who are running those are, or used to be, dental nurses. So looking at your apprentice now, in 10 years' time, they might be very high operationally within Bright Horizons, because that's actually the opportunities that come. There's so many more jobs out there, area managers, recruitment, compliance, which means that if you then sell your business, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're exiting the sector. You could actually move on to a completely different job out of setting if that's what you fancy doing. And of course, you know, the biggest one is exit values. At the end of the day, this is only going to increase values, and that's the biggest thing. Lots of new people in the market, lots of money within the market. It means competition increases. It means actually groups have to work a little bit harder to get hold of the stock they want to get to increase their acquisitions, and all of this will only increase values, and that's from the top end to the bottom end. So even those small individual settings, they are going to increase in value, and it's thankfully all thanks to the soulless private equity funding. One thing I didn't want to do today was kind of get a bit too in-depth and complicated. It can get a little bit technical, and that ends up just sounding a little bit scary. What we're really looking to do is emphasize today the importance of an exercise in understanding. So those 3 questions we asked ourselves earlier, it's about saying, well, actually, how do I get the answers to these questions now, and what can I do to make sure that when I get there, the results are what I want them to be. So it's about preparing for your sale. As I say, that doesn't have to be a definitive date. It's about kind of just always keeping that in your mind. It's about maximizing the value when you get there. It's about maximizing the profitability within the business now, so you can enjoy it while you're there. It's about understanding the valuations and where that places you in the market, because that then allows you to work out what kind of buyer you're going to have, what kind of sale you want. If you're a limited company, will it be a share sale or an asset sale? All these things come into play. And then you can compare that to who's out there at the moment. Actually, if you're looking at a particular type of buyer, and that sale is not going to be feasible to that particular type of buyer, is it that actually we need to be looking at, well, let's find a buyer in the long run that is going to work for you instead, because actually the business is expanding and you've outgrown the finance viability for individuals. So it's about understanding the business as it is now and how you want it to be, and then lining things up to get what you want at the end. As I say, 5 months or 5 years, it doesn't matter. The actions are all the same. And it's about building blocks. So it's purely about small actions that are going to prepare you for this sale. It's not about kind of doing everything overnight and kind of getting a sudden, completely working understanding of your entire business overnight, because that's not feasible. We can't do that. It's about understanding small parts of it to make sure that your eye is on the prize at the end of it. One of the big ones here is property. And I think we might have already had some questions about property as well. And this is actually something that, as a broker, is actually a bit secondary to me, because I'm a commercial broker. I value businesses. And so, as long as that business is in a secure property and has security of tenure, that's what the business is worth. But it can have such a large impact actually on your value and how easy your sale is going to be. And things that you think, well, that's just how my lease is, actually could have a massive impact on how sellable your business is. So if you're lucky enough to own the freehold, then one question you need to ask yourself is, when the time comes, will I want to sell or lease my property? And what will my buyer want? We talked about the large groups, and actually they're in a position at the moment where they don't buy freeholds. They don't want to, because actually it's the same amount of money could buy them another setting. So actually, if you have a freehold and you're in a position where you're going to be selling to a group, the likelihood is that lease will be dictated for you. Now, as that competition grows over the next 5 years, you'll suddenly find that if the groups will say, well, if we have to buy the property to get the set in, we will buy it and we'll find a way to work around it. But at the moment, they are able to say, no, we don't want it. We'll have it as a lease, but nothing else. It's also thinking about actually the freehold itself. Whose name is it in? Is it that you're running a limited company, but the freehold's in your sole name? Is it that actually you want to sell it all together? Or is it right to keep that separate now? So it's thinking about things like that. One of the biggest problems within this sector is you often get large freeholds and smaller businesses. And this is especially true in the South, where obviously property values can be very, very high. What this means is that often, you might have had someone who set up a business. Initially, it was in their home, and then it grew to the point where it took over the home, they moved out, but they have a £400,000 business in a £1.2 million property. Now, the problem is that actually at that size, that business is unlikely to appeal to a group or one of the micro consolidators who might actually want to buy freehold, because the business actually isn't of the size and type they're looking for. So straight away, you're saying, well, I'm going to need to find an individual who can pay this for the business and that for the property. And unfortunately, the finance just won't work. It's one of the biggest problems with also having childcare in domestic premises as well, because you need to be thinking about, well, actually, am I going to get to the point where my very, very profitable childcare in domestic premises, which can be just as big as a reasonably sized setting and just as profitable, actually, I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to have to sell my home alongside it, but I won't get full value for my home because it's technically a half commercial property. And I probably won't get full value for my business because actually someone trying to get finance for both, my pool of buyers is so much smaller. So it's thinking about these things now, because what you don't want to do is get to a position where that's dictated for you. Leaseholds they can be problematic. And one of the things you need to do as you approach sale is think about your leasehold, and particularly think about your landlord. Landlords can also be problematic at times. We all know this. And actually, if you have a commercial landlord, you're in a much better position. Commercial landlords, they own lots of properties. At the end of the day, they just want them filled. The likelihood is, if you were to turn around to them tomorrow and say, I have someone who wants to buy my business and they would like a 15-year lease, your commercial landlord will quite happily say, yes, please sign here. Thank you very much. But actually, if you have an individual, they can be a bit harder to deal with. They might have an emotional attachment to the property. It might be actually they refuse to do anything until the lease is finished. You need to give some thought to what lease you have and who your landlord is before you go to market, because you need to think about how that's going to be managed as part of the sale. The length of the lease and lending is quite a big deal. And actually, again, we're in a sector where it's not uncommon for people to have 1-year rolling leases or 5-year leases. However, if your buyer in any way needs to get finance, and, in reality, let's face it, if any of us went out and bought a business tomorrow, we would need to get finance in reality, then the bank is going to want security of tenure on that property. And they're not going to be willing to accept a 1-year or a 5-year lease because it's not showing that that business is going to be able to go forward. This could be a real problem. If you're in a position where you can get a longer lease, always ask for minimum 15 years. It will put you in a much stronger position and show that security of tenure. And if you're in a situation where you can't achieve that, and the business itself is kind of growing and it's going to have a really lovely value, then it might be worth thinking way before sale, right, how is this lease going to affect me and what actions can I take now to make sure that it doesn't impact this when it comes to that. A minor point as well is think about, actually, again, a bit like the freehold, what name is your lease in? If you are running a limited company and your lease is in your sole name, it means that your landlord is going to need to issue a new lease, a whole new lease to your buyer. If you have a 15-year lease in your limited company name, then technically by buying the limited company, your buyer is buying that lease as well. And it minimises the fuss of just trying to transfer that lease over. Talking about length of leases, one of the biggest things as well is things like church leases. Now, obviously, there's lots of people who are running their day nurseries out of churches, and they're great, obviously, within the community to run a business. But actually, 9 times out of 10, churches are often run by trustees. There's not necessarily a business element to them, and so you get your 1-year rolling lease. Now, this is changing. I'm actually seeing a lot more churches that are taking more of a business approach to it and looking at it as a long-term revenue stream. But those 1-year rolling leases, if that's what you have, devalues your business to a very, very large extent. Unfortunately, you are only guaranteed the next year that you can run your business from there. And in reality that you're probably the biggest income stream for that church, and they're not going to ask you to leave. But because of that, the bank won't lend against them. You're not going to be able to get your buyer. So you're looking at just purely finding a buyer who can pay cash. Your pool of buyers gets smaller, and as a result, you are in a position where you have to accept a much lower value on the business, regardless of what that business is worth. It's one of those things, again, that needs to be considered quite far in advance, because actually for most people, they're in a church because they want to be in the church and it's the perfect location for them. It's about trying to find a workaround that makes sure that you can achieve what you need to achieve and the church can achieve what they need to achieve as well. On the subject of property, but not leases or freeholds, one minor point I wanted to raise as well was church halls and certificate of lawfulness. Now, this is a bit dry, but I'm going to just kind of give this as a little tip. Essentially, during COVID, there was a change to planning permissions. And what they did was they took day nurseries and put them in with a lot of other commercial properties under particular planning permissions. Great, no problem. It makes it a lot easier to do a lot of things. However, church halls and community halls are not included in that. They are in a different planning category. And that means that actually, if you're running a day nursery out of a church hall, technically, you don't have planning permission. Now, don't panic. It's a minor point, because you've been there, you've already been there. It's fine. But it does mean that when you come to sell, there will be an issue of actually, does it have planning permission to be there? And technically you don't. It's so easy to solve, but it does require you going to the council and basically saying, I need something called a certificate of lawfulness to show that technically, while I'm not in the right category, I have the historical prerogative to be here. Get that bit of paper, you're fine. Go into a sale without it, you're going to delay your sale and also probably just scare the life out of everyone involved. So it's probably worth doing beforehand and just getting it done beforehand. Now, obviously, as a broker, the biggest thing for me is the numbers, but the numbers don't necessarily have to be just that turnover on your accounts. There's lots of different ways to approach the numbers and making sure that you understand them to prepare yourself for sale. So the first one, though, is the accounts. And I think we're all guilty of it. We get our accounts, we go straight to the bit that says how much tax we have to pay, we cry a little, and then we just don't think about it again. And that's pretty much it. There is a real importance to accounts, and understanding your own accounts to be able to understand your own business. And it's about just not looking at that tax figure, it's having a good understanding of what the figures are, how they're broken down, what they include. There's also a real importance for accounts, even for sole traders. And again, by law, as a sole trader, you do not have to supply business accounts. However, trying to get lending for yourself, if you want to refinance, or for your buyer against a tax return is actually very hard to do. Because it doesn't include the level of detail that shows truly how the business is doing. So as a sole trader, actually, it makes it easier for you to sell if you have accounts, but also it makes it easier for you to understand your figure as well, understand your business and the figures. Breaking down the accounts, it will help you, it will help your buyer, and it will help their lender and put you in a much stronger position. And it's so easy to do. Basic accounts, to be honest, can be done yourself, though the accountants won't agree with that. But basic accounts can also be done very cheaply by an accountant. And working with an accountant who understands the business and the sector is also very important. Most accountants will cover a huge amount of industries, and that's great. But if you spend a bit of your time with your accountant explaining what these costs are, then actually they can much better work out how to present your accounts, not only for a buyer or the lender, but actually for you to be able to track your costs through. When you get your accounts, because by the time you get them, they're largely a historical document, a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to the figures. But if you can see year on year how your costs are changing, it will also help you plan going forward, and also be able to see where actually savings can be made as well. So making the figures line up, management accounts. Now, again, when I talk about accounts, people say, well, I send everything to my accountant and then they send it back to me. And as I say, the biggest problem with that is that by the time you get it, it's already old news. The last few years, if it's taught us anything, is that things can change very, 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 very quickly. And actually, what you don't want to be doing is getting your accounts and going, I spent what? How did I manage that? And again, this is something that's more important often for smaller settings than actually for larger settings, because often they have the systems in place, or they have, an accountant who's going to spend more time with them, or they have the accounting software. Whereas actually a smaller setting is more likely to be, it's very much I got to the end of the month, there's still money in the bank account, great, let's deal with next month. And that's how it's very easy to lose track of what you're spending and what you're doing with your money. Management accounts, people are scared of them. They think they should be complicated. They think they should be this massive spreadsheet with lots of formulas and lots of things that can go wrong on it. And, it's something that they have to spend days every week filling in. But actually, it's more about just getting the numbers somewhere in one place. Keep it simple. all you need to do is track your income and your costs. This is the money I've got, this is what I've spent. And then you can see that actually turns out everyone in the setting does have your Amazon password and keeps ordering stuff, and that's why your purchases costs have gone up so much at the end of the year, because we're all guilty of it. You don't even get me started on how much I spend on Amazon. It also allows you to manage your cash flow better, because actually, if you're sitting and looking at your figures and going, the insurance came out this month, the annual insurance premium came out this month, and actually that's the worst possible month it could have been. I've had no funding this month. Why did I put it there? Because actually now I'm going to have to move money around. It allows you to track these things through and really kind of manage the cash flow to say, right, well, I'm going to move that to a month when I get my funding, because that way I know that's covered. That's one payment every year and that's gone. Keep it very, very simple. And going back to what I was saying about the accountant, have a chat with your accountant, and chances are is they have a basic management accounts template. It doesn't have to be complicated. You just have to be able to follow it so you can see where your money is going and where it's coming from. And then hopefully, if you're kind of looking at these figures, you can then make your figures go up, because you can actually start looking at your figures and seeing what they tell you about the business and kind of how that compares to everybody else. Now, within this sector, it's, as I said before, it's quite insular. You don't go chatting to other nursery owners about what you're spending on staff, because there's always a fear that they're going to have them away before you blink. So it's quite hard to sit there and go, well, how am I doing compared to other people? And because of that, there's also not that information in the public domain. So, in some sectors you get regulatory bodies, or you get like a group of chartered accountants who will go, well, every year in this sector, people spend this much on staff. And you don't have that in this sector. So it's quite hard to work out if what you're doing is right, if it really works. Now, the problem with benchmarking figures as well is that people get very knowledgeable about them. So they say, oh, well, no, you must be doing it like this. And actually, that doesn't work for everybody. It's one of those things where, if we could take staff as an example, people talk, the average staff cost is 55 to 60% of your gross income. Okay, that's the norm. Now, in reality, there are groups out there who will automatically assume that they can run at 50%. So it doesn't matter what you're paying at the moment, they will assume that they can run at 50%. However, there's also those out there who will say, well, no, it has to be this level. Everyone will have their own opinion as to what those staff costs should be. Now, you can see from this data here that actually, when I look at the average of what I've seen over the last year, the average staff costs and all the settings I've seen of all sizes, of all shapes, was about 62.19%. So technically, we're running a bit high across the board. But that is an average. It's not uncommon, especially within smaller settings, where you find staff costs at 85%. And actually, if staff costs are running at 85% and then you factor in rents and everything else, then very quickly they're running out of money. And that becomes a real problem. Understanding your figures and setting your own benchmarking as to where you think they should be is kind of about understanding what kind of role that has within your business, but also understanding how operational figures and financial numbers relate, what happens with them. If you're in a situation where your staff costs are 85%, the chances are is you are not paying your staff too much, despite what they say. Oh, no, you're not paying your staff enough even. You're not paying your staff too much. It's not that you have too many staff. It's actually probably an indicator that there's something else within the business that needs to be looked at. So it might be actually how those staff are deployed, how you're managing your sessions. Actually, do you have a lot of staff in the mornings when there's not so many people there? Are they still there at 4 o'clock when actually half the kids have already been picked up? So is there an operational reason as to why this figure is shown as being higher, rather than actually you're incredibly generous and paying them all way too much? Getting to understand those figures will make it easier for you to track. Say things like purchases and food, that is something that if you are running a wholly organic, everything made from scratch nursery, you are going to be spending more. That's how it is. But actually working out what works for you and then trying to find a way to keep within that allows for a profitable business, very, very important. Again, little and often is enough. This isn't about giving you guys a list of 101 things to do that you need to go out and get in line tomorrow, just to make sure you're ready to go. It's about thinking about these things as you approach it. So things like, I mean, Imogen, I imagine we'll talk about staff contracts and stuff like that. You know, it's actually, do your staff have contracts? You know, are those contracts actually easy to transfer? If you're a limited company and all your contracts are with your sole, in your sole name, then actually technically whoever comes in would need to issue them new contracts. So it's about understanding 2P, it's about things like that. It's also, as I say, going back to what I was saying about insurances and, you know, costs and managing your money and making sure that actually you know where your money is going. You know what intake you need to be having in September to make sure that those bills are paid. But little and often is key. If your lease is coming up for renewal, or if you're one of those people who maybe doesn't know that if their lease is, when their lease is due, then maybe actually the next time you're sitting in the office and you look at the folder that says lease, just pull it out and have a very quick look at it. When does it expire? When are your rent reviews? Actually, you know, whose name is it in? Okay, so you made a note that actually when this expires next year, you need to talk to them about getting that in a limited company name, and you need to talk to them about getting a good length lease on it. It doesn't all need to be done at once. It's about an exercise in understanding. It's about making sure that you've got what you need to go forward, not only with the business today, maximizing your profitability today, hopefully making your business life easier and making your business itself more efficient, but also about when you get to those 3 questions, be that 5 months, 5 years, that you're in the best, strongest possible position to get not only the price you want out of your business, but the type of sale and the type of buyer. So I hope you all found that useful. I think
That's
we might have some
amazing.
questions.
Thank you, Leah. That's amazing. We've got some questions.
Okay.
Let's bring them up on the screen. You may have
Okay.
answered, I think, this one. Let me just get rid of our banner. I'll put it back up in a minute. Hide. So, what lease term is the minimum requirement for a sale? I think you spoke about a good length of lease being 15 years.
Well, yeah, essentially, if you're selling any kind of sizable asset, anything that would require any kind of finance, in reality, you definitely don't want less than 10 years, and you really want as many years as you can possibly get. Once it drops below 10, it means that actually a lender will not be able to get financing for that period. So that own lending terms aren't going to be as good. So, you know, if you get a loan over 5 years rather than 10 years, it's going to be a bit tighter to pay it back each month. So actually, if you can kind of get above that 10 years, especially, but even further than that, 15 years is definitely the sweet spot. I mean, if you have a 1-year rolling lease, I'm not saying that your business is unsellable. I'm just saying that it's a very small pool of buyers who are going to be in position to say, I have the cash to buy this. And in reality, you probably won't get the true value of the business because of it. So that's
And
the
you
thing
can
to
get
bear
better
in mind.
value, can't you, if it's a wider pool, because there's going to be more competition.
Exactly, yeah. So, you know, the bigger the buyer pool, the bigger competition, the best value, and hopefully the type of buyer you want as well. Because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, they come to sell, and it might be actually, if you've only got a choice of one buyer and you're not really feeling it, you know, this is your baby, you've put your whole life into this. You need to make sure that actually the buyer's right as well as the price.
And that's so important that you raise that, Leah, because I think in the sector, having, you know, supported the sector for 20 years, what we see is it is an emotional thing, isn't it? The decision
Oh,
to sell
absolutely.
a nursery is very different to what we see with you know, other businesses that have been sold or have management buyouts. And you want to almost know that there's going to be a legacy, that there's going to be that the nursery is going to continue without you in it, considering serving the families and the children and the staff are still going to have jobs, and that matters.
Yeah.
It seems to matter a lot to nursery owners, that there is that legacy and that right buyer is found, and they don't want the wrong buyer, they want the right buyer, but they also want to maximize their sale as well.
Exactly. And I mean, even though it also comes out to a lot of people, they have nurseries in the towns or villages they live in. And
Yeah,
actually, what you also don't want is for your parents to be coming up to you in Sainsbury's complaining about the person you sold it to. Try to get the right person in as well.
so true, so true. So here's another question. We've recently renovated our building, which would have taken our net profit. How would this work, as it's not regular yearly expense? No, not
Okay,
renovation.
so I did promise to try to keep this not quite so technical, so I'll try to keep this light. But essentially, businesses are valued on what's called EBITDA, so it's earnings before interest, tax and depreciation and amortization. Put my teeth back in, and really, what that is it's the true business profit of the business of the business. So on your accounts, if you've had a big expense like this, or hopefully if your accountant's just doing what you're paying him to do, your profit is as low as humanly possible. So as a valuer, my job is to go back in and make sure that we're adding things like that back in. So all the personal expenses, obviously perfectly legitimate, things like use of home as office, your own vehicle, stuff like that, all goes back into the pot. And things like this, which would be a one-off expense, you wouldn't consider that as to need to go on. So actually you'd be building that back in straight away within the valuation.
Yeah.
However, and I say this, one thing you should be looking at is if you do large renovations or make large changes to your business, obviously there's ways to depreciate through accounts and everything to get kind of get some of that back. If you're going to make massive renovations and things like that, you probably don't want to be looking to sell in the next 3 years anyway, because you want to make sure you can get as much back out of it as possible. And if you've expanded, especially, expand the business. Get that profit in there first, build that business a little bit further, and it's worth a bit more anyway.
The more I listen to you, Leah, and the more I think about sort of general small business advice, is that nursery owners need good accountants. And if they're not getting good service off their accountants, they need to move to another accountant. They need to, you get what you pay for with accountants, don't you?
Without a doubt, and not just accountants. It's, as I say, it comes back to that insularness again. Is you need people around you, because actually, for most nursery owners, if you have a single setting, then you are not just a business owner. You are in ratio, and you are doing payroll, and you are doing all of the compliance. And at some point, you might like to have your own life and your own family as well. And there's lots of people out there who can help. People who, I mean, like you, Imogen, people who can come in and kind of cut through the rubbish and kind of point you in the right direction. So, and your accountant should be, your accountant should be one of your team, and if you come to sell, actually, your accountant really should be involved in that. So, I work with a lot of accountants where I sort of say, right, well, they're looking to sell in the next year. These are things that hopefully you can, speak to your accountant and get them to split these costs out. Ask your accountant to kind of prepare this. If it's a share sale, your accountant is actively going to be involved in the sale. Find someone you like and trust, and who's going to look after you and knows their stuff.
Yeah. I think it's so important to have a good accountant that sort of knows things that are going to help maximize the value of your business. They don't need to be your IFA, but they need to have just such an awareness of what's going on, don't they, to sort of help you in the long term and not in the short term. I do think you get what you pay for with accountants. We're organising a summit. We're organising a summit in June up in Leeds, and I'm definitely going to try and get some accountants to come along, and I think there's a lot of value in hearing from an accountant who can help people to understand their numbers, because if you don't know your numbers, you're so crippled as a business owner, aren't you? Crippled. So here's another question. It's a long one, so I'm gonna put it up on the screen. We recently renovated, expanding our capacity from 35 to 56 little people, I assume. This decreased our occupancy. Would the potential of being able to increase occupancy be accounted for in the value, or is it based on current occupancy? From what you've just said, it's based on EBITDA.
Well, that's it. It all comes down to profitability. But when we're calculating EBITDA and the final valuation, how you get to that is you apply a multiple to that. So, I mean, one of the key things I can see there is obviously expanded from 35 to 56. Going back to what we were saying about the group buyers, now, while they have a long list of criteria they like to see ticked in order to go ahead with the sale, their general opening gambit is we don't want less than 50 places. So straight away, by getting to 56, you're starting to kind of go on their attention. But going back to what I was also saying about they don't have to work very hard at the moment to get stock, is that actually what they don't want is anything that you have to put too much work in to grow. They would prefer you to have done the work first. If you do it and increase the EBITDA, they're happy to pay for it. But what they don't want is something that's going to require a lot of operational man hours to kind of build further. So my feeling is that always that if you have that potential, then you should push into it anyway.
Mhm.
I mean, you can't put, there's an old saying, you can't put a price on potential. That's the biggest thing, is you can't sit and say, well, because you could have this many spaces, you're something worth X% more. Unfortunately, you just can't do it. What you may sometimes get is a small increase in the multiple, depending on kind of what that potential is, but it's going to be minor compared to what you could achieve if you did expand into it yourself. So it's all, if you can do it, it is well worth doing, and then exiting after that.
So you'd be saying to this person, build up that occupancy. You've now got 56 places. That's great, better than when you were
Yeah,
35, but build it up now, then think about exit. Don't
yeah.
give your buyer a job to do, which is what you're
Exactly.
saying.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and also, I mean, the thing is, because it still comes down to EBITDA, is you're going to get a much lower multiple because your profit is going to be lower. So, you know, if you can build it up, then straight away you're increasing the value regardless.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it's something that people sort of say, oh, you know, the potential, but you, as I say, you can't put a value on it.
Can't put value on that.
If it's something you can grow into, and also in situations like this, you know, the argument would be there is that while the capacity is there, it is unproven. So actually, you know, it's very well saying we could do all of this, but actually, if it is that the area won't support that, let's face it, most of them do, but if it doesn't support that, then actually it is unproven potential anyway.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Brilliant. We're getting through these, which is brilliant. Here's another one. I have a license to occupy premises at a sports club, and a nursery has been there over 30 years. Read today that my business is likely to be worthless because I'm a licensee. Is this correct? License
Unfortunately,
rather than lease?
yeah, it will depend on the particular license, because license can often cover a magnitude of different situations. But as a rule, in most licenses, there's not a guaranteed renewal, and they're very short terms. Actually, you know, there's not a lot of rights for you as a licensee, and a lot of people enter into them because actually it's very easy for you to step back if it doesn't work out. But unfortunately, if you then grow like a business in it, it becomes problematic, a bit like those 1 year leases on churches. There's ways, again, it's about being aware of this. And the chances are is that in reality, if you've been there 30 years, the circumstances that made them put a license in place has probably changed as well. So it's always worth having that conversation if you can move to a more traditional lease.
Yeah, yeah. So talk first, and yeah, then and hopefully can change the situation. Brilliant. Thank you for that.
Exactly.
Got another one. My lease expires in 4 years, and currently the landlord doesn't want to commit to anything long term right now. Any tips? Sounds like that's not a commercial landlord, doesn't it? Sounds like that's a private
That's an
landlord.
individual landlord, without a doubt. Yes.
Mm,
So yeah, I mean, the tricky thing is actually, you know, your landlord isn't required to issue you a new lease before the term expires. So it can be problematic. What I would say is that it would depend on your initial lease. If it is that you had a 15-year lease, and actually it's within the Landlords and Tenants Act, then technically you have that right to renew regardless. Now, why it wouldn't support a buyer, it does mean that it's more likely that if you were to go to them tomorrow and say, I'm selling, and the buyer says, well, I'm buying, but I'm only going to be here for 15 years, then suddenly that 4 years wouldn't matter anymore, and they'd be more than happy to help you out. So it's not a problem. So it is really about your current lease. With individual landlords, as I say, they can be tricky, and there's workarounds. Again, you know, I've been involved in horror stories where individual landlords have managed to almost hold sales to ransom because they're not willing to kind of negotiate, or there is a feeling of, well, you're about to get some cash, so maybe so should I. There's ways and means around it. I mean, for a lot of people, I sort of say, you know, a little white lie. I need to refinance. I want to invest in your property and in this business, but to do that, I need a longer lease. And suddenly they're a lot more open to it. You know, it doesn't always work. I have a situation at the moment with a seller where actually they will not discuss it. They will not discuss it, even when I've got solicitors going to them saying, we have a buyer who wants to buy, you know, they will not discuss it. And unfortunately, they can't be forced. Offer to pay
no.
their costs if it really is make or break. Definitely always pay their costs if it's early, you know, because often that is, especially with individual landlords, that's what it comes down to. So it's purely that they just don't want to pay the money to do it. Then say, well, I need
No.
to get it done for XYZ. I'll pay your costs if you're happy to do it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good piece of advice. Our company's LLP, limited liability partnership. Is there much difference when coming to sell companies compared to limited companies?
Not really, nothing at all, to be honest. Your due diligence is pretty much the same. It's a lot more in depth than if you're selling a sole trader. But actually, it's about the wording in the sale contract and everything like that. It doesn't affect your value at all. It's just making sure that your buyer, their solicitor, and your solicitor all understands how it works.
And would the same theory apply that the lease should be in the name of the LLP?
Oh yeah, exactly. An LLP is literally, I mean, it runs essentially almost identically to a limited company. So
Yeah,
any rules that apply to a limited company, it should be the same for the LLP.
brilliant. Okay, dokie. I knew this question would come up. Could have predicted this. I should have played bingo questions, shouldn't I?
Always
How do you
does.
value? How do you value a nursery business? Any
It's
which way you want
witchcraft.
to be fair.
Like that. No, yeah, it's I think, this is one of those things where a lot of people kind of go, well, that's what I'm turning over. And, there's a traditional broker's approach is very much to look at the accounts and go, well, you're turning over that's what you're worth. In reality, it all comes down to that thing, what I said before, EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It all comes down to the profitability. You find the profitability of the business and then you apply it to a multiple, and your multiple will vary depending on type of setting, location, you know, what your type of buyer is going to be. If you consider it that the groups at the moment are paying 5.5 times, if you're in a nice position where you have 150,000 plus an EBITDA, you will get £5.50 for every pound of EBITDA. But actually, if you're in a position where you may only have £8,000 of EBITDA, then in reality, you're probably more likely to get 2 times. I use huge amounts of comparable data to show what's been sold nationwide to basically try to say, right, well, that went for that and that kind of in this area and that kind of thing, to make sure that it stays current. And that this is the same approach that the banks use as well. So if you're talking to a lender, again, they're not going to take my word for it that that's what that's worth. They are going to do their own valuation and they will exactly the same methodology.
Yeah, and that makes most sense, doesn't it?
I will say on the website there is a what's the EBIT if people do want a bit more information about that, because it can get quite technical. But yeah, I'm more than happy to go on the website and you can find that, or give me a call and I'm happy to talk you through it if you want to be bored by it.
Yeah, folks, if you just go to owenfroebel.co.uk, you can have a browse around the website, see which nurseries are for sale, whilst you're perhaps having your pudding tonight because you haven't had your tea because you've been watching this. So, right, let's go to another question just while we've got the last 5 minutes. If your nursery is doing well and you wish to expand onto another site, is it best to secure finance from the bank against the company or to try and get private equity involved to expand it if it's a working model?
If I'm honest, if you're looking at moving to your second site, you're probably more likely to go the finance route regardless. As I say, it comes back to that economy of scales thing. Private equity is looking as a rule quite big, quite chunky. So if you're moving from a single site to second site, you're much better going to the bank. And obviously you've got the security within the original business to lend against, so that's not a problem. At that sort of level, you will probably still need to make a similar sort of contribution. So you're looking to 20 to 30%. But if the cash is in the business, then that's probably the way to go. In reality, private equity, if you're looking to kind of push forward with private equity back into expand your group, you're normally looking at probably at least a minimum of 5 settings already, or 2 very chunky sizable settings in order to get that level of interest that's going to make it worthwhile for you.
Okay, and one final question before everyone starts showing their love and thanks to you, Leah, for this evening. One of our customers is asking, I think the lease references the 1928 Act. Is that true? You only have the right to renewal if it's the 1950s Act that was used. These are obviously acts relating to leases, aren't they?
Yeah. To be honest, actually, do you know what? I don't really know the answer to this one. I'm pretty sure that the Landlord Tenants Act, which I think is 54, would supersede any previous act. So in
Yeah.
reality, even if your lease references that, it just means it's a very, very old template and it would be seen under the same act.
That would
However,
make sense from our understanding of law, that
yeah,
you can easily find you've put an old law in something that actually has been
exactly,
superseded.
exactly. So that would be my common sense approach, but with normal disclaimers, I'm not a solicitor. I don't understand
Yeah.
these things as much as they do, but that would be my approach. But if whoever that is wants to get in contact, I'm more than happy to kind of put them in touch with people who could answer that question a lot better than I can.
And just on the point of solicitors, we often speak to people who say, you know, I'm buying a nursery. You know, I've been told that TUPE doesn't apply, so you know, give me some advice on how I can sack the staff that I
Yeah.
don't want to hire. I mean, even on Saturday when I was coming back from Manchester, I was having a conversation with somebody along those lines. Did you feel that there is enough access to solicitors for helping people to understand where to get their legal advice from when it comes to contracts and sales and things like that?
I think it's not something you necessarily look for automatically, and that's probably one of the biggest problems. And you know, as a sector, we're now starting to get a lot of specialist solicitors, which are particularly, you know, useful. As again, a bit like the accountants, you get very, you know, they cover all industries, but it's useful if they understand your sector in particular. You know, and actually an experienced, but any experienced commercial solicitor should be able to talk you through the basics of things like 2P without any real concerns. I get people who try to do transactions without solicitors, and that is just, you know, it puts you in the worst possible position, because essentially everything's going to come back on you. You're either going to find that, you know, your counter, be that the buyer or the seller, is going to get everything they want and you're going to get nothing, or actually you're going to leave yourself way open to some problems. So, you know, no matter what, get a solicitor, ideally who knows the sector. And again, you know, if it is that you don't know where to go, then reach out to other people you know within the sector. You know, people like Imogen, for example, who work with lots of different people who will have their own connections, because they'll know not only who is knowledgeable within the sector, but actually who is reasonably priced, who is actually going to work well with you, who is actually going to take a commercial approach to a transaction and not just keep it hanging on for 9 months. And all of these things are very, very important. A lot of people say, oh, you know, well, I've just went to my high street solicitor. This guy did my house sale. And actually, when you go to someone who is kind of a bit more that kind of solicitor, what you're doing is either you're paying on an hourly rate often to get them to learn about the sector, which you don't want to do, or you're going to leave yourself open again. You know, legals is something that you don't ever want to scrimp on. There's people out there who, you know, will charge a lot, but there's, you know, most solicitors will give you a very fixed price for a transaction, and you know that they're going to be someone who's going to be by your side the whole way. It's worth finding a good one.
It's money well spent, isn't it? Leah, that's been amazing. So yeah, if you're watching live and you have found this useful, can you please chuck a love heart in our direction? We've given up our evening for you this evening. With our pleasure, obviously. We love sharing information.
Of course.
It's very much something that we enjoy doing. We get a lot from it. But if you have found it useful, please tell us in the comments, or chuck us the appropriate emoji or whatever it is you do when you're sat watching a Facebook live. But we hope you found it useful, because obviously this is a very important topic, whether it's something, as we've said at the outset, whether it's 5 years from now or 5 months, you need to know about these things and know that you've got somewhere you can go to get the answers to your questions, because I think that's just so important, isn't it, to know who you're going to call when the time comes, and what your options are. And it's so important to be educated on these matters, isn't it? Brilliant. Well, no, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned lots of words. I hate the word amortization. That really is a horrible
amortization.
Word, amortization.
Sorry?
Yes, we'll have a bit of amortization.
I was going to say, I hope everyone has learned EBITDA, because there will be a test later.
Well, exactly. EBITDA is fair enough. I think we hear that enough. But no, its full definition is horrible. But yeah, no, people are saying thank you. Thank you, very useful.
Thank you very much.
Great info. So yeah, you've got some love there. And I'm sure there'll be more and more people who get to watch it during the replay, because as I say, I think most people who don't get to see it live do catch up and watch it on the replay. So if you are a replay watcher, once again, can I ask you to say I'm a replay watcher, and if you've got any questions, then I'll head them in Leah's direction by dropping her an email.
Please reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out. You've got Leah's contact information on the screen. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much, Leah.
Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
End the stream.